Here's what you can look forward to on this episode of The Nice Guys on Business.
And I love the medium of podcasting because I'm aware that 90% of people, or 95 or 99% of people are not going to work with me directly. But if I can help thousands of people get a TEDx talk, that's brilliant. If then, a handful work with me every few months, perfect.
The first rule of Fight Club is do not talk about Fight Club or The Nice Guys on Business. Go from where you are now to where you could be. Get expert tips to grow your business, to be more productive and more efficient, whether you're trying to build influence, grow your community, or make it rain. Best-selling author of Nice Guys Finish First, Doug Sandler, can lead the way. The Nice Guys on Business is produced by Turnkey Podcast Productions. Now, here's your host, Doug Sandler.
How would you like, Nice Guy community, Turnkey Podcast community, how would you like to achieve the highest rank at everything that you do, whether it's in business, your personal life, the projects that you undertake, or the systems that you're building? How great would it be to awaken your alpha? Or how about this? How great would it be to be able to not only awaken your alpha, but use the power that you've just created to do your own TEDx talk? Well, Adam Lewis Walker, he's been interviewing, studying, and learning from the world's most elite minds, conducting nearly 400 interviews on one of his podcasts, and I know he's got a bunch of interviews on another. One of his podcasts is called Awaken Your Alpha. The other one is called help me with this one, Adam, is it the TalkXcelerator Podcast?
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Well, he's a TEDx speaker himself. He's a best-selling author and a coach. His system helps aspiring TEDx speakers achieve their own talk. Here to talk all things TED, his story, how podcasting has helped him get there. Welcome, Adam, to the show.
Thanks for having me. I love that intro.
Well,
covered a lot of bases.
I know we got a lot. We got a lot to do, and we only have 4 hours to cover it in. So let's get rolling right now. So, man, your story is so very interesting, and I loved watching it. By the way, if you're listening to the audio version of this, go over to Turnkey Podcast, and you can check out the video version of this as well. And as long as the video doesn't completely crap out, I know Adam's got a horrible video, so he's going to just use his thumb and clean the lens every once in a while. So your story is so compelling and so interesting, and it really did put you in a spot where you had to make some choices. So why don't you go back to 2008 for me for just a quick second and talk about a fateful moment that you had, and then we'll talk about what happened since then, Adam.
Okay, yeah, cool. So I was, my background, I was in the south of England. I was a PE teacher, and that went quite nicely with, I was an aspiring Olympian. So I didn't get to the Olympics, which is a key distinction. But I was, the lifestyle went well because when, teachers have largely the summers off, that's when my athletic season was at its height. And I was 28, got basically reaching kind of my physical peak in terms of just got a personal best that year, first time in a long time. And got into my biggest competition. It was English summertime as UK Challenge final in Windsor. And obviously it's English summer, so it's horizontal rain and it was just rough weather. And they had the opportunity to move it indoors. They didn't. Us as a group of pole vaulters got together and was like, it's not, if one of us is going to get injured, it's who. And they wouldn't move it. But it's a big competition, so it came down to who wanted it the most. It was my biggest competition. I wanted it maybe a bit too much. So I was doing quite well. I was in fourth spot, and any, people in athletics or anything where you get a medal, that's a useless spot because you want that medal. So right. At that point, in the worst conditions, there's only 4 of us left because obviously the bar goes high, you get eliminated. I basically needed one more height to get a medal. There's prize money involved, which never happens in England for athletics as well. And I ran through because the conditions, the pole vault bed where you land is like a swimming pool. Most vaulters were sliding down their poles. We had umbrellas over the poles on the run up. It was a mess. And there was a massive block puddle where you took off. And I historically take off a bit close, meaning my heel of my spikes hits the ground first, which doesn't really have much grip. And it was in a puddle. So my next attempt, someone from the crowd shouted out, he's done, he won't take off again. And so I thought I will take off kind of no matter what. And that's what happened. I got a bit too close. It felt bad. I overrode the fault of self-preservation. Like it felt wrong. And I tried to take off and my heel hit the ground first. I was too close. I slipped on takeoff, dislocated my knee, tore the ACL and bruised all the bone ends and ripped all the meniscus cartilage off the bone ends. So that was the end of pole vault for me. And it's, and that's that was the fork in the road, as it were, because it was, I don't know if I'd be speaking to you now if that hadn't happened. Maybe down the line, but it would have took a little bit longer to get there. So it was
I was just surprised I had you here today. Why you said yes, I have no idea. It was the tea and crumpets I had promised you. I'm sure that's what it was.
Oh man, you would have had me at tea and crumpets. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and I was a positive guy then, as I am now, but so I kind of tried to smile it out for about a year, in denial a bit, thinking how quick I could get back. And, surgeons were saying, no, it's not about how quick you can get back. It's think about like playing basic sports with your kids when they're young or older. And I didn't even have kids at that point, or none on the horizon. So I was like, okay, a bit of a perspective shift.
Right.
And it was, a good 2 years of rehab crutches operation. And, I was a good year in. I was still smiling on the outside, but slippery slope, fully depressed, which, it's fine to admit now, but at the time, if anyone's been depressed, it's hard to admit then.
So Adam, they say that all things happen for a reason, and you go back to even talk to some cancer patients and people that have had some horrific things, accidents, paralysis that have happened in their life, and not to necessarily compare your situation to those terrible situations, but even with adversity such as you have faced, things happen for a reason. What do you think that accident was preparing you for? What was the next step in your life that you're like, okay, this completely makes sense? Because at some point you go through depression, then you go through relief, and then depression and relief, and then you discover something. So what was your discovery at that point?
Yeah, well, you make a great point as well. Like what you said about, all these terrible things that happen to people. That's something that I beat myself up with at the time, because I had that view that, there's a lot worse things that could happen. The issue was for me at the time, and for anyone listening to this who's maybe thinking, being a bit hard on yourself because you should feel better because, it's not a life-threatening thing, for example. If it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you. That's the only thing you've got as reference.
Right,
and
right.
As soon as I got that in my head, it took a while. And I only really got it in my head afterwards. That's okay. It's okay to feel like crap if that's the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Obviously, it's not a competition. And so that was the first thing. And in terms of like preparing me for stuff, I was a teacher, I was coaching, and my main focus, obviously, if anyone's trying to get to the Olympics, you really have to kind of be quite tunnel visioned. So in terms of when the rug got pulled from under me, my focus shifted onto other people's success a lot more. When I had my knee like a coconut and I was thinking, what the hell am I going to do? That was when I attended my first kind of sort of business, personal development type event in America. Just because, so I wouldn't have gone down that route quite so quickly or quite so much. And I needed a point of reference. I had it good, but if you had it, if that's all you don't realize it. So, the Awaken Your Alpha thing was, at that stage, I had to literally battle for it every day. And I wasn't looking to thrive particularly or, be high performing. I was just looking to get 1% better than yesterday and drag myself out of this. And I was determined throughout the whole process to do that. I didn't know how to do it. So there's a lot of experimentation and just, it's different for everyone. But it was just once I started and hit rock bottom, which took a long time, even though I was still down there for a while, getting that slightly bit better each day really motivated me. And so it's a point of reference now for, everyone goes through adversity at some point in their life. And I'm sure some more good chunk is coming to me at some point, and it comes to us all. So it's about being prepared. And at that stage, I wasn't as mentally strong as I thought I was. And again, you never know till you're in it, but I'd like to think I'm a bit more prepared now.
So share it with those that are in our community, whether they're aspiring business owners, aspiring podcasters, whatever it is that they're trying to get into. At what point did you find yourself turning a corner and seeing that life was not just about pole vaulting, or life was just not about athletics, but it was more about the lessons that you learned and the goals that you have set? And no matter what your goal is, whether it's to hit the highest level of in pole vaulting, or whether it's to get your first TEDx talk about the importance, and when you realize that you were turning that corner and being able to accomplish some stuff that you never thought you would be able to do.
Yeah. Again, in all honesty, so my accident was 2008. 2010, my first son was born. And I hear a lot of people say like, God, that's such a hack. And that it was nice to put your focus on something way more important and something, and when you're anyone who's ever been like really depressed in your head kind of thing, it's hard to get out of just thinking about yourself, which is horrible. It's nice it's important to focus on other things. And that's why I think a mission is so important. And that was ultimately the big issue, was not particularly my knee, but it was that loss of identity and loss of mission. And I was lost basically. So I think that really helped. And very aware that I didn't want, he's 0 or 1 day. I didn't want him to see me like this or have that kind of influence on him in any way, shape or form as best I could. So it's, a further kick up the butt.
I get it.
Yeah. And so I've heard entrepreneurs say, our kids are such a hack because, you've got a bigger why and you're striving for stuff like that. But that was really a kick up the butt. I wrote what was a whole book at that point. I'd launched, again, on the day he was born, I launched the UK Youth Conditioning Association because I was a strength and conditioning coach, very much into high performance with under 18s as well. And so that gave me a kick up the butt to do that. I wrote a book around that concept, which later became, cut down and modified into a chapter of the New Rules of Success, which came out in 2013. And that was a step away from just physical stuff, really. I was a PE teacher and I was an athlete. So that was a step out of that world, and using the book as a business person, using the book to open that door and get my mind as well as other people's into, it's not just about the physical side of things. Because a lot of times I work with people, it was all mindset. And so that was, my chapter was all about, raising a family for success. And again, I was relatively young at that point, but it was more about, once you read it, about you and focusing on you to be a role model, basically.
When did you realize after the accident and after the writing of the book, which was boiled down to a little bit more of a chapter or something a little bit bigger, when did you realize that this next step in your career was actually going to be something that would continue on? Now, it seems like, if I'm doing my math correctly, 2008, 2010. So now we're at 2020, basically, as of the recording of this. Yeah. There's a 10-year gap in there. When did you realize, when you turned the corner, that this is something that you had your hands on that was actually going to be really good for you? Or maybe you're still realizing that.
You put a key point there. Is the whole approach and what we're talking about. There's never a destination. It's that approach to life and that attitude. Right. And that's what it's whole. But on that point, I think the kind of the penny dropped a bit after being in that book and co-authoring that. So that gives you the bestseller title as a business, and that can open some doors. And that was the idea for Awaken Your Alpha. When I met all these co-authors that on paper looked like they had nothing to do with each other, like a South African dentist who's 60, a 30-year-old English teacher. And I was still teaching at that point. And all these different, but then when I met them and I was having the conversations after, later at night, and realized there was some serious similarities, and it was the mindset. And I was like, this needs to be shared in some kind of book, podcast. And that was where the idea for Awaken Your Alpha came. And I wanted it very international. And what it became, Tales and Tactics to Thrive. And that's when around 2014, I launched the podcast early 2014, quit my last job at that point as I was a college lecturer. And I had 2 kids, and it was that point I'd been transitioning for too long at that point.
Right.
And I was stuck in that transition. And that was probably one of the hardest phases, which doesn't look like it on the surface, but I look at it like this. I was a part-time teacher and a part-time entrepreneur going up against professionals, and in both. So I wasn't as good as I could have been in both. And you're getting torn, and it's horrible. And only you can decide and make a decision when to jump. And it's never perfect. So I just, again, against actual advice, I just jumped.
All right. So let's talk to now the podcasters or the aspiring podcasters that are in our group that are listening to this, and talk to them for just a second about Okay, so you have, and I can recall going through this also through this transition of in 2013 reinventing my career from entertainer. I was a bar mitzvah MC to this new thing, which was a podcaster, author, speaker, writer, all of that stuff, and having that one foot in one spot and one foot in the other. It's really challenging to give 100% of your efforts to too many things. It's impossible to do it and do it successfully, and really be dedicated to all of those. So how did you make the transition financially using your podcast and your TEDx? Because you did a TEDx talk. You also did, you started your Awaken Your Alpha podcast.
And again, I moved across to the States in there as well. So that was, I love deadlines. If you dig into the book, I'm a big strong believer in deadlines, and we've sort of talked to these, mentioned certain markers in the life. And when my boy was born, 2010, we set that deadline that we're going to move to the States before he starts school. So it's 5. So it's 5 years. And we didn't know how he was going to do it. And so in terms of me quitting my last job at 2014, is about a year out, 18 months out before we moved, and we're moving to the wilderness. So I took the approach, I'll do the hard yards now. Otherwise I'm going to arrive in a new country. No idea, like nothing set up. And there's a lot of things to, if you can just sweep under the carpet and all hit you at once, or you can, reverse engineer it, as it were. And I only did from that point work or things that I thought I could do this in the middle of nowhere. So that was a key piece of what attracted me to podcasting as well as having a big gob and getting my message out. So
talk to our community of, again, I want to talk specifically, if you're an entrepreneur and you're in the audience, just pause for a second. If you're a podcaster and you're listening to this, I just want to talk to you guys for just a quick second, because a lot of people will get into podcasting and, they're doing it to build community, build influence, and make money. And, in your particular case, those things were important, but the last one, that making money thing, had to be kind of critical. I mean, you're moving your family here. And so tell me, unless you're a trust fund baby, and I don't think that you are.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Obviously, if you heard my history, I was a teacher. Money didn't really motivate me, or doesn't motivate me massively. But the issue was, I had this strong message, and that's the key thing. I suppose it's like a TEDx. Well, it is like a TEDx. The core, I believe, has got to be coming from that something worth sharing, a strong message. So that was my real driver, and probably to my detriment of. At that stage, this is a long time ago in terms of podcasting and how you do it. And the obvious model was obviously get millions of downloads, get sponsorship and all that sort of stuff.
How's that working for you?
Let's talk about that. I launched my podcast the same week as Tim Ferriss. He's done quite well. I followed models like I would say, John Lee Dumas was like, that was his big thing around that time. He was doing it 7 days a week. So I thought, wow, that's a bit extreme. I'll go 3 to 4 times a week. That is still extreme for me. Yeah. Everyone's different. So the first year and a bit, I went 3 to 4 episodes a week. Podcasted really well in terms of, downloads and going, not as well as getting sponsorship and millions of downloads type stuff. Right. But it almost broke me in terms of the work rate, because I hadn't really considered any other monetization strategy apart from credibility, positioning, visibility, and the sponsorship, which I quickly realized that's a tough one to chase, especially at that time, unless you do have huge downloads.
Right.
So it's the podcast and Awaken Your Alpha, especially in the early days, was massively about positioning, and honestly, it was a big research project for the book. Right. I kind of had the idea for the book first and thought, well, I'm not going to sit around researching a book to the level of how I saw it for 4 years, just researching a book. That's ridiculous. So the podcast was a hack to get the book done, but also, kill a few birds with one stone, and it's a podcast and give a lot of value at that point. So yeah, it's, as I say, the Awaken Your Alpha podcast was purely started with, I got a message that I need to get out. And this, I massively believe in it. I see it as, a best-selling book. And I just jumped into action without, as in the business hat on, without as much thought probably about the business side of it.
Okay, so I want to focus on this for just a quick second. I hope I'm not putting you in a corner here to give away all of your secrets, but I think that the challenge is that when you're listening to this as a community member and thinking, okay, this is cool, and he's got a good thing going, but how the hell does he make any money? So the question will be from those that are in our community that are either about to launch a podcast, thinking about launching a podcast, or trying to figure out what direction to go in. Does my podcast need to be like a side activity from my business? How does it work? Where is your income coming from when it comes to podcasting? Or maybe it isn't coming from podcasting.
Yeah. So this is good, and I've got two good perspectives on this, because we spoke before the interview. I've got two podcasts, and they are night and day in terms of their approach and how they were conceived and the kind of emphasis behind them.
Yeah.
So as it stands now, as we kind of covered the Awaken Your Alpha one, and that is obviously it's still going, and it's been ups and downs, but that has opened so many doors for a networking credibility tool and visibility. I've got clients through that. Lots of clients did a lot of one-to-one coaching and consulting via that.
Right.
In terms of the more recent one, the TalkXcelerator podcast, and I'm coming at this, I'm not obsessed by podcasts and thinking, I want to start a podcast. When I go to these conferences and everyone say, I've got 5 podcasts, or let's start another podcast, and I'm there going, no. Like, there's a lot. If you do it properly, there's a lot of work involved. Like, but let's think about this. And 6 years with this one, I learned a lot of what not to do as well as what to do.
Right.
So I thought, if I'm ever going to do another podcast, it's going to be as much as possible flipped from how I did it, started it before, the emphasis behind it, because I got my baby and how this rolls.
Yeah.
I don't want another version of that. So the TalkXcelerator podcast, I'd been doing, before I launched that podcast, I've been doing a year to 18 months of actually the TalkXcelerator process and working with clients and helping them get their TEDx talk. Again, with the caveat that I don't want to start another podcast for the sake of starting another podcast.
Right.
I've got a podcast, so it doesn't make me a podcaster. So that's a key thing. It's a bit like, there's not a massive payoff from doing like 10 TEDx talks as opposed to doing one TEDx. That's the important thing. Much like if you're best-selling author of 10 books as opposed to one book. It's both best-selling authors. So with that, I would only start a podcast if it completely was leveraged from the start, was making money from the start before it was launched. I could see the value in it, and so it's
okay.
I can dig into that as much as you want.
No. So I want to give an example just so my community is 100% clear on this. And I love what you just said, because it just reminded me of the story of how our business from the podcast production side got started. And again, as you're listening to this, just keep in mind, we went to this event called New Media Summit. And Adam, I think you've been to, how many of those have you been to?
Two. Yeah.
Okay. So you've been to 2 of those. So the first one, I've had a chance to go to now 5 of these. So I've kind of worked this system and I understand how the process works. At the first one, I remember going in there and saying, hey, there's 150 people at this conference. How am I going to convert some of these people without making it obvious or making it a commercial for my business? How can I convert some of these people to clients? Because I really didn't need 150 guests for my show. We already had probably a guest list a mile long, to make a long story short. And I know that's going to be impossible to do.
I had a similar experience, the thread you're going down as well.
So we had 150 people there. 119 of them applied to be on the show. I accepted 40 of them from the show. And I'm like, I can't even fucking put 40 people on my show. That would be a year worth of interviews if I'm doing, pretty much one a week or whatever it was. I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. We created a new show. We hadn't even launched the show yet. The intent of the show was just to put people into our funnel for our podcast production business while presenting their message and also presenting them with, I wasn't being misleading. We did present their message to our community. It was a new community. We hadn't launched that particular show yet. We had landed 7 of them as clients, somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000 a piece. And before episode 1 even launched from that show, we had made between $30,000 and $40,000 from that show,
awesome.
Which launched an entire business for us that we didn't even really know we had the ability to launch. So when Adam says, whether it's consulting or turning guests into clients, or whether it's turning your community into clients, or whether it's the ability to make business or get business before you even launch a show, that's what he is talking about. And I'm just telling that in my story, just so, again, I don't want you to have to reveal all of the secrets. I'm like, my hand is I have an open hand. It's like,
I think I got a unique, and I think this is where everyone can listen to like your ideas, my ideas, and they then have their own spin on it and like say, I like that. I might be able to tweak that and use it in a business idea.
Yeah.
So like as I say, the Awaken Your Alpha podcast, for visibility, it launched the same week as Tim Ferriss. It was ahead of him. Again, it's different landscape. Then ahead of him in the morning before America woke up, because I was still in England then. Took the screenshots. It's really good on that. But the podcast that more recent is completely different. I understood then at that point, I'm not going for millions of downloads with this. I'm not going for, I don't want any sponsors because I sponsor it. Like I advertise, it would have to be quite a good chunk of money. And I'm realist. I know someone's not going to say, here's a good chunk of money I want to advertise on your show. For the Talk Accelerator, for example.
Hold on, before you go, just listen carefully as you're listening to this. Downloads are not important. You cannot take a download to Wells Fargo and say, can you cash this, please? It doesn't matter how many downloads you have. Smaller niche audiences are worth gold because they're listening to you specifically on the subject that you're talking about. His TalkXcelerator podcast. Guess who's listening to that? Just people that want to do TEDx Talks. It's a much smaller subset than entrepreneurs.
Well, this is that. So, the Awaken Your Alpha is generally a men's development podcast, but that's still quite broad. The Talk Accelerator, what I like about that, as you said, it's for aspiring TEDx speakers. I love the fact that I can put that and say, if you're interested in TEDx, having a TEDx talk, this is really valuable. If you're not, seriously, do not listen to it in the slightest. It's an absolute waste of time. And so for me, because I get excited about TEDx talks as well. So that's number one. So it's a much smaller audience. And again, I've been through the years where I was too obsessed with looking at the download numbers, and that's not healthy as well. And then, I'm having a bad day. Why? Downloads are down. Like, who cares? Like, that's not good. It's not a good road to go down. So now, as I said, that wasn't enough just to be that niche and that works. Within my process, I tinkered with the idea of, how can I make part of my process, these insider how can I make this work so it's valuable for me before I even put it onto the TEDx, onto the podcast. So as part of, if someone becomes a client of me, the relationships and every TEDx event is so different. It's about the connection. It's about the insider information, basically. And it's not just like, that's insider information from a TEDx event in America. That's interesting. You will get some value from that. But the one that you as a person are looking at applying to, that is useful. I, as part of my process, I independently contact, as a 6-year podcast, I've got credibility from that, independently contact the ones that are on their hit list. So on module 3, we do like the TEDx hunt. They identify specific ones that fit them, their area, and that they're interested in. I then independently contact these organizers who are not largely over-interviewed. My pitch is for about an 18-minute interview, like a TEDx talk, to promote, and what's in it for them? Promote their event, their application process, get better quality of guests or applications. Then I do Zoom, again, using our tech like we're doing now. I record that. Like, it usually ends up being, we get going like half an hour to an hour interview, raw video. That, like 30 minutes later, that goes to my members area for that specific client who's interested in that event before they apply.
That is freaking gold. That is gold. It's insider information.
So this is what my point is. If I could do that without having a podcast, that would be even. But obviously, my word is huge. Obviously, I stand by it. So I obviously have to launch a podcast because that's a podcast.
Well, the beauty of it is, though, it's great information. And even if somebody wasn't interested in, let's say, TEDx St. Paul, they're still going to get some information from it that would be relevant for them.
So
too.
That was kind of point one of how I'm making leverage in this, making it before I launch. Then point 2 was, these are it's the timing. Like, 6 months later, that's valuable. But for that specific event, what we're talking about, and their application deadline's gone, it's lost a huge amount of the value for that person. Also, they need it there and then. It's the timing. Number 2, these are raw video interviews that you get. We really dig into, literally set what subtle things that are not on your website that we wouldn't be able to tell if you get an application with that just really turns you off for whatever reason. What things bring it to the top of the pile? So it gives that competitive edge. And then secondly, the Talk Accelerator podcast are 18-minute highlights to go under that. I want short episodes. I want very punchy. That increases the visibility. And them interviews are done. They've served their value already for, me and the clients. But also now it's about, repurposing, and also from the feedback of the podcast so far, they are really valuable, and it's different. It's unique. And it's, again, you create your own show how you want, but it's good. So
spend just a second talking about that, because I think that is a good component of the reason why somebody would even get into podcasting to begin with. Talk about the idea of having such a well-niched product or a well-niched service, so that you're not, I have a show for entrepreneurs. That's the Nice Guys on Business podcast. We also have a podcast called Turnkey Podcast, which is for a much smaller subset. not just entrepreneurs, but for people that are looking to get into podcasting. Talk about the importance. And then I have this other show, the Ford Mustang Early Years podcast, which is like just a couple hundred listeners, but they're so engaged and they so love it because it's specifically focused on the things that they like. So talk about the importance of that, niching down into something really specific as opposed to being very general with your message.
Okay, well, it's huge. And I'll give you an example, like you talked about the New Media Summit. And when I was there came there as an icon of influence. And again, so I turned up with, at that point, I had my TalkXcelerator process and Awaken Your Alpha, a men's development podcast. The audience is about 70 to 80% women for some reason. And in terms of that niching down and clarity and visibility, it's quite a jump to go from a men's development podcast, Awaken Your Alpha, to, I help people get TEDx talks. And that can be explained in a conversation, but it needs a conversation. It's not obvious. Right. So that was one of the things for that is not just that experience. Like, that is not right. And that was when I was on the fence of, should I start another podcast around this? That really helped the decision of even just having the TalkXcelerator podcast, how to get a TEDx talk, just having that, regardless of what's in it. Number one, that is useful for awareness and clarity. And so that was kind of the decision. I know in the sort of the mastermind the day after, I put it round to like the other 30 podcasters, and I said I'm unbiased, and I put that out. Should I start a podcast around this? I want your opinion, because I kind of knew, but I genuinely at that point was hoping everyone would say no.
So hold on a second, just so we're clear. You've said a couple of times TalkXcelerator Podcast. I think you meant TalkXcelerator Program that hadn't become a podcast yet.
Yeah. At that point, yeah.
Okay, and, I got it. Okay.
So sorry, and everyone. And I obviously rated people's opinion there, experienced podcasters doing lots of great things. You were there, including you. Everyone said, yes, great idea, start the podcast. And I was like, damn. So that's, again, a few tweaks. I really wanted to make sure it was firing on all cylinders from lots of angles. Because as I say, my experience of before when I started the original podcast was, okay, sponsorship could happen. And then I'll create, coaching consultant and processes on the back end as an afterthought.
Right.
And this was completely the other way around. So what's the original question?
Well, that's okay. The importance of kind of like niching down into a specific audience.
So exactly. I wanted it. Okay. This is, again, coming back to who is the client or potential client, who's this relevant to? That's what the podcast audience is. 100%. I didn't want any like confusion. It's not for this person, it's for only that person. And that was kind of why it's important. So anyone listening to it is a potential, and I love the medium of podcasting because I'm aware that 90% of people, or 95 or 99% of people are not going to work with me directly, but they're going to get, if I can help thousands of people get a TEDx talk, that's brilliant. If then, a handful work with me every few months, perfect.
So what's the variety and the range of services that you offer? It sounds like you offer, and again, as you're listening to this, as you're aspiring podcaster or in podcasting right now, but just trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I make money from what Adam is talking about? Look at it this way. He's probably has a good number of listeners, but even before he had a good number of listeners, even one listener that might become a one face-to-face coaching client, that would be great. How about a group coaching environment, and how about an online training environment? So are those three services that you offer, or do you only offer one of those?
So the TalkXcelerator process is kind of has like 3 levels, but it's all the same process. It's an online group process. We have live Q&A calls, because that was another thing. I looked at the market, and my opinion on my experience was for getting TEDx talks, there's a lot of coaches out there, I believe, but that's because I'm in that world a bit, who their only approach was kind of one-to-one, very high ticket.
Right.
And yes, that you need that individual touch because it's a very individual nature, but there are certain things that need to be done. There are processes that need to be done. And, I didn't see obviously the insider interviews piece is a unique piece of the puzzle. And that one of the, not happiest, but like, I was really proud when one of the testimonials of a guy I helped get a TEDx talk, in his testimonial said, there is stuff here you won't get from anyone else. So there are lots of, people who do this sort of thing and can help you, and speaking coaches. I'm not a speaking coach. I'm a TEDx. So again, even I don't offer the other stuff around it, if that makes sense. So, there's a lot of speaking coaches who do the whole thing and, I can help you prepare for that. I focus in on that, just that. Right. That's my core. And, so that was, I think that's really important.
So you have an online community, it sounds like. You do. You also do one-on-one coaching for this particular program?
in that the Talk Accelerator process, if they want more and more like all of their meetings as opposed to a small group at a specific time, they want it flexible in their schedule, then that's basically like an upgrade to the Talk Accelerator process. And for the Awaken Your Alpha stuff, which is a separate thing, I've got an online community that, again, at this stage, it's just launching, which is around sort of mindset, and the book and everything I go through is very kind of stoic in its approach. And
so when is the TEDx Accelerator program online course completely automated? When is that happening, or is that not happening?
Well, so and again, on the low end, there are probably stuff out there where they've just got an 100% automated course. I didn't go for that because I want the and a lot of it is, but I wanted that individual touch point because I want ultimately the success. And the thing that frustrates me about an automated course massively is, the majority, and this is a general stat across the board, that people don't finish them. People don't do it. So I wanted that accountability of the live Q&A calls to go through, just to give people a kick up the butt and say, where are you? These are my excuses. Okay, that's done. Let's move on to the next bit. And I genuinely want the success. I don't want people to pay and do a course. Yeah, the course is great, and you not get a TEDx. So that was what I found when we ended up doing the Launch Your Podcast program with Steve Olsher. What we found was, if you have a component of live coaching and an automated component, you're going to have much greater success. We've put, I want to say, over the last couple of years, the last 2 years, we've probably have put 75 or 80 people through our Launch Your Podcast program. And of the 75 or 80, I would say that there's probably only been 3 or 4, if that many, that haven't launched a podcast. Yeah. I just not finished. See, that really, I know that's great stats, but just is that piece that frustrates me. Like, I'd want people to go through it because I know the power in it. And so that's, the course is 100% automated in terms of the modules, the trains. It's the live Q&As and the touches that are in there that can be, that can be modified. And again, evolution for people listening to this. When I started this, it was no automation, where it was, I recorded each, when I sold it before I created it, the first ones, and it was a beta, created it as I went week on week, did the training, did the live Q&A for that specific week. And there was no option of how long it was 10 modules, 10, 12 weeks. We had to do that. And that was how it went through. And that's really good if you could keep up with the pace, but someone might have had some personal incident in the middle of it, then they feel like they're behind. So now there is flexibility within this. I have the automated training component of it that I have suggested ideal timeframes, but it is self-study. So if someone's got like a big 2 weeks off near the start, they can blast a bit of it, and then understanding that then they might slow down for it. But so now it's more flexible because of the automation. But there are the live calls are now, again, not every week, they're bi-weekly calls. Then we have, again, a new component that I've evolved in the last 6 months. TEDx Talks, to anyone listening, if you're interested, do it by yourself or with anyone. 6 months to 12 months is a realistic time frame to get one. So again, if you just go through the training and do a few things, that might be 3 or 4 months. Right. I didn't want them to drop off. So now I have a TalkX mastermind component of a year's support that every quarter, anyone who's ever worked with me through this process that jumps in, because I was like, I don't want people to be like, yep, I'm going to get it, and then just become so close, and then life gets in the way, they drop off, and that can happen because I've had people get it really quickly, and then, as I said, 6 months to 12 months is a realistic goal, and there's that's and can be ambitious, but so it's about that continual support. And I thought if that's how long it takes, there should be a component of this process that has some support there that people can jump in, and also people who've achieved a TEDx to then jump in. Okay, how do I leverage it? How can I improve it? Oh man, it's so perfect. And there's so many, as you're listening to this, just keep in mind, there are so many opportunities for growth. And if you were to interview Adam, how long has your TEDx Accelerator program been, not the program, but the podcast? How long? Oh, the podcast. It launched in almost mid-November. So okay, it's just about a month out, and I launched with four episodes, very tactically. Again, TEDx organizer, TEDx speaker, TEDx organizer, TEDx speaker, and a case study. So anyone who's interested, they go and list that on launch day. They're going to hear it. They're going to hear something. If they are a potential client of me, they're going to have no questions apart from, can we have a call? And I offer the idea clarity calls. That's the key thing, because I love doing it, number one. And it's so important to, even if it's just a sounding board for your ideas, if your ideas are perfect, need no work, it's good to have, you can't read the label on your own bottle. So that is valuable individually if they never work for me, for just to see, what do you think of this? And 100% of the time they get a key piece of insight. Because again, to me, certain things that become common sense now, because you're just delving into this world for so long, so people are always like, I did one this week and they're like, whoa, I didn't think of it like that, or oh, and that could have just the call, let alone if they worked, we could have saved them months and lots of rejections because they've just got their mindset in the right way of how it needs to look in the future.
So the evolution of Adam's business, as you're checking this out and trying to figure out, well, I don't really know what I'm going to sell, or I'm not really sure what my service will be. I would say, do not let that be a reason that you are held back from beginning either a podcast or starting a specific a type of business. If you don't know everything about it, you're totally in the right spot. I would say, I don't mean to say this from any kind of be ill prepared, but you are going to be building the plane as you're flying it, because you are going to be responding to your community as your community says, this is what we're demanding from you. Adam had an individual coaching program, one-on-one. He started seeing activity. More activity meant that he had less time, which means that he had to create an environment where more group. So created a group environment. Then another activity, he needed to create an online component, which he has. Created a Facebook group probably in all of the communities, built that. And now he's seeing this as, hey, now that you've done a TEDx talk already, maybe we need to figure out some sort of mastermind so you can get some more information and we can all share, so that we can all learn the secrets together about how to get into TEDx. And can you see how this is not just, I need to know it all before I get started? You're not going to know it all before you get started.
I can tell you the next piece of evolution of that as well. Sure. I said I only teach about the TEDx, achieving TEDx talks. Again, so creating the business that aligns with your long-term vision and everything you're about. Awaken Your Alpha is all about amplifying your life. And so, TEDx Stage is about amplifying your mission, your message. And then I want to do more and more, professional speaking. So I do quite a lot of speaking as it is, but that's somewhere I see, traveling and doing a bit more of that. So as this evolves and more people go through the Talk Accelerator, when I'm in a position that I feel actually I've learned quite a lot in terms of professional paid speaking gigs, then that's a natural evolution of people who've gone through the Talk Accelerator. Generally, a lot of them want to spread their messages, improve their business and lots of other things. But there is a portion as well who want to do more and more speaking and interest in that professional side of things. And I'm at a position, everything I teach is from experiences as well as I'm learning or everything. But I'm at a position when I've evolved a bit more in that arena, then that would be a natural progression of an additional training or coaching around that aspect. And so that's where I see that heading.
That's
and it's
awesome.
it's just kind of it's a no-brainer if that's where if you kind of know where you're going on that front. So yeah,
and who knows where they're going? Nobody actually knows where they're going when they get started.
You know what I mean? The direction, I should say the direction you're pointed if you follow through and take action.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I'd say that it's hard. It's really hard. And I use this analogy a lot of times when somebody wants to know everything before they've launched their podcast through our production company, and they're trying to figure out how to market it and how to make this thing launch properly and how to build products and services behind it. And I'm like, hey, it's really hard to steer a parked car. Can we just get this thing rolling?
Oh, hell yeah. Do not compare to other people's podcasts and stuff. Because as I say, when you launch the same week as Tim Ferriss and that's your kind of measuring stick for success, that's going to be a tough time. And so, there's, and I think it's important, like you said about the downloads, there's going to be someone out there who's probably getting like 5 downloads an episode who's making a lot of money somehow from that. And then you'll be like, I got 100 downloads. And then, and then someone will be like, and I know we've both seen and heard of people who, I think even into the millions of downloads and making like 0, which is just mind-blowing to me. But just so you know, that's out there.
Well, when Steve Olsher came on my show, and this is probably over 2 years ago as a guest, and we were sharing at that point, he had Reinvention Radio, I think was his only podcast before it was Beyond 8 Figures, before he launched that show, came on my show. And this was the mind-blowing experience for me because as he's talking to me, he's like, how many downloads do you have for your show? And I don't care. I'll tell anybody anything. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know. I think we have like 1.2 million or 1.3 million. He says,
oh, see, that's huge. That's huge.
He's like, you're probably making like a lot of money. You should be making, if you're doing this properly, you should be able to monetize that to, and I forget the number. Let's say he said $200,000. And I'm like, And so he said, well, will you share those numbers with me? And I said, sure, I'm happy to share those numbers. It's an easy number to share. I'm not making any money from my podcast. He's like, what do you mean you're not making? And it was eye-opening and awakening to me, because I realized that we had this great podcast and we had this great community, and we were doing nothing with them. Mm-hmm. And he basically said to me, there's just a few things that you need to do in order to tweak that. And that was when he invited me to New Media Summit.
I'm more guilty with that with the Awaken Your Alpha podcast. I really am.
Well, that's okay.
I just love being transparent.
It got you into podcasting, it sounds
exactly,
like.
Yeah. And it's served a lot of pieces, because I want to always, reassess, talk about awareness and just reassess, like, why am I doing it? Forget about the history of it.
Right.
Like, why would I continue to do it? And there's many ways, so long as it's justifiable and it fits into your puzzle and it's sustainable. That's another key thing, so both of these podcasts go out once a week for me.
Right.
And, Awaken Your Alpha is scaled down to once a week, because I don't need more podcast episodes per se for that one, because, I've got 370 something. So it's not more and more, but it's that consistency. And also I set it up as a podcast for you, if you're listening, that you feel you could do consistently for years, pretty much no matter what. You got to start in that.
We made we didn't make a tactical error, but we had boosted our Nice Guys on Business podcast. We were at our heyday, we were at 5 episodes a week, and we recently made a decision. We're over 1,000 episodes now. We're 1,000 episodes in, and we said,
I saw that. Yeah.
Hey, let's just go back to doing some great interviews. Maybe doing it once, maybe twice a week. We already show our community that we're consistent with our message. We don't have to put it out there 5 days a week, where it's like overload. We don't have to do that.
Well, yeah, so, I had a similar thing when I had when I scaled down, or made the decision to scale down from 3 to 4 to like 2 episodes for a year, was when I had Robert Greene, who's like, I think probably my favorite episode, or equal, the author of 48 Laws of Power. And I sandwiched him in, obviously, when I was 3 to 4 episodes a week on a Wednesday. And so the day before the day I was talking about this episode, oh, by the way, I got Robert Greene on the show. And then the day after, I was talking about the next episode. And you, like you say, you can get lost in the volume. And I was like, that's, I wanted to showcase that more and more. And I know I can, but that was when I think there's something for me personally needed to be tweaked.
Man, I so appreciate having this conversation with you, Adam. I love talking all about podcasting. I love talking about business, and I'd love to have you back on where we could get you on a live coaching call with some of our clients, because I think that our clients, whether it's through Turnkey or our Nice Guys on Business podcast, a number of them want to do TEDx. They all talk about it. That's their next step.
And that's another thing, I suppose, as well, in terms of focusing on that for the last couple of years. I wanted to have something that was complementary to the circles I was in. Something obviously I believed. The things that moved the needle for me in my life in the business sense was book, podcast, and TEDx. It's pretty much as simple as that. So I'm happy to, I genuinely believe in that aspect. And also, like, when we've been to these summit stuff, so you're not necessarily tread on people's toes. And I think this complements a lot of things and a lot of the circles I was in. And organically, people, regardless of what I want to talk about, people always ask me, how do you do a podcast? How do you get a TEDx? They've been asking me that for years. And, I can teach them about podcasting, but it doesn't fire me up as much as the TEDx stuff.
We got stuff to talk about then. There's definitely avenues for it.
That's the thing. And so I was a lot of transition. And again, I felt a pull, because just because you can do something doesn't mean you have to. And again, I felt like, oh, I have to teach people about podcasting, because I'm like quite good at it and I do it a lot and all that sort of stuff. And then, so there was a lot of conflict with me for a long time, because I saw a lot of my peers were doing that. And, it was nice when I focused in, and I've noticed myself, people ask me these questions, and I just wondered, wait a minute, I'm way more energetic and excited. I get excited about podcasting, but just that little bit more about I can see, and I talked about the vision of, doing a lot more speaking. And so that's how it all kind of fits together for me. And, if I was really focusing on both things, which I could do, I'd just be a little bit more diluted.
Totally get it. Well, unfortunately, I did not expect our interview to go as long. I have literally another interview in 3 minutes, so I gotta fly. But thank you so much, Adam, for sharing everything that you're doing with TEDx and with Awaken Your Alpha. And totally cool. Love having you on the show. We'll get you back.
If people want to, reach out, as I say, please listen to the podcast, especially any TEDx aspiring speakers. All the information's there, and I can give you, again, free idea clarity call. If you think you may have an idea worth sharing, just run it past me.
How do they get in touch with you?
So TalkXcelerator.com, Adam Lewis Walker across all social media, Awaken Your Alpha, same thing. If you put it in Google searches, you won't miss me. TEDx, Adam Lewis Walker, my TEDx talk will come up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Awesome. We'll make sure we put all of those links and access to Adam directly in our show notes. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out with us one more time. And we'll put this video up on the Turnkey Podcast group page. If you're not there, just go over to Facebook, Turnkey Podcast. Just enter that into the little search box. It'll come up. It'll also be airing on Turnkey Podcast and the Nice Guys on Business podcast. Adam Lewis Walker, man, thanks for being here. I appreciate it, brother. Talk to you soon.
Loved it. Thank you. Thank you.
For the Nice Guys on Business, I'm Steve O'Brien. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.